All right, everyone, here we go. Chapter 9, Woodshedding and Script Analysis. This chapter is going to be covered in 2 videos, and we'll go ahead and kick things off with creating a performance roadmap, what it is to analyze or mark up a script. First thing you're going to want to note is at the end of this chapter in your textbook, you're going to find a script analysis worksheet. You can also find a copy of the worksheet in Blackboard for this chapter, so you'll want to make note of that. A couple of things for you here. If an answer to a question on the copy that you are studying is not clear from the copy, well, real simple solution. Make something up. So there is a little bit of freedom at times, depending on the script that you have and the way that it's written and those sorts of things, where if it's not explicitly stated how you should read something or what sort of reaction or tone you should have, then it's up to you to determine what that should be, and you get to play around with a couple of ideas and see what works the best. However, for you to maintain a consistent performance, it's important that you stick with the choices you make in your script analysis. In other words, once you've made a decision on the way that you should give voice to a character, make sure that you give that voice to that character in a consistent sort of way, that you do it the same way every time once you've made that decision. Now, as you're going through the course of reading a script, if you decide that the decisions you made just aren't very good, then start the process over. Make another decision, but then stick with that decision and be consistent with that until that one doesn't work anymore. But hopefully, you don't have to do that process too many times. Now, to mark your copy or not to mark your copy. There are some people that find that taking notes on a script, writing little pencil notes in, doing some highlights, some people find that helpful. Others don't. They find it as a distraction. One thing for you to note is that if you pay too much attention to your notations as you read a script, or if your script has excessive markings, you are probably overanalyzing the text. Notes are there to help you to give reminders as to how to say certain words, how to create certain sorts of inflection, maybe different points of pause or emphasis or things like that. But it should not overtake the script that you are reading. But regardless of your individual process or how much you mark your script, the basic woodshedding process is going to remain the same. It's just a matter of whether you have extra notations on your piece of paper or not. Some suggested markings are offered in your textbook. You can take a look at those, but there's not really a universal code for marking up scripts. It's not that you have to use certain notations and things like that, kind of like how there are with editing from English class and that. Honestly, you make up your own system, and if you do mark up your copy, make sure that it makes sense to you. Some people like to use slashes to kind of separate thought to thought or to create pauses. Some people like to underline words to note words that should be emphasized. Some people use arrows and starbursts for various reasons. Whatever works for you. If it makes sense to you, use whatever makes sense to you. Now let's get into some of the nitty-gritty of it all. Woodshed your copy. From the moment you first read any script, you will instinctively develop an interpretation. And many times your first impression is probably pretty close to correct. At the very least, you're going to be kind of on the right track. You might have to change some things here and there, but generally your first impression is not going to be a bad one to go with. Now, here are some key elements to woodshedding. The structure of the copy. take a look at it, the way that it's written, the mechanics, the mood, the attitude, the overall logistics of what you're looking at on your script. Second, know your audience. Identify the target audience. That's a good way to discover your character and the way that your character needs to be portrayed. The ways that are going to appeal or speak to a certain audience are going to be different for different types of audiences. Therefore, it's going to make sense to make sure that your character is able to relate to that particular audience on the level that you want to see a certain sort of engagement. Whether it's a positive one, a negative one, make sure it's intentional for your audience to be able to pick up on and receive what it is you're giving them. Third, what is the backstory? What's the moment before the beginning of the script? This is the specific event that brought your character to this moment in time and to which he or she is responding. So this is that idea of pre-life that we've talked about before, making up a lead-in line. What happened right before the beginning of the script so that you can carry the emotions over from that pre-life, from that backstory, into what is happening in your recording session. Fourthly, who are the characters? How do other characters, whether they're known characters written in within the script or they're unknown characters, may be part of that backstory, how do the other characters interact with your character and with each other? What is the slice of life that is going on over the scope and the course of this script? Fifth, what is this scene? Where is it physically located? What's the environment? What's the surroundings like? What's the temperature? Remember when we talked about the 6 W's and the H, and that 6th W was weather. That's what we're talking about here. What's going on around and about? What's the setting overall? Sixth, what does your character want? What is the underlying want and need of your character, or his or her purpose for speaking, and what is ultimately achieved by the end of the script? So some of this may wind up being subtext that you're going to have to give a little bit of a nuance to, a little bit of a subtle hint as you make your way through the read. Seventh, how does your character behave or move? The writing style or the context of the script will tell you these things. Pay attention to them. Make sure the voice that you give corresponds to that particular behavior, movement, action. Eighth, are there any comparisons in the copy? If the comparisons exist, how many different ways can you speak the words in a way that makes those comparisons clear to the listener? Make sure that if there's a preference between one thing and another, that your voice gives an allusion to the fact that one is preferable or not preferable rather. Ninth, what is the conflict? What happens in the copy to draw the listener into the story? Is it a humorous piece? Is it a serious piece? How should we deal with the actual storyline? How do we present it? How do we make it engaging? And finally, how is the conflict either resolved or not resolved? Does this indicate a change in attitude and behavior and energy as we tell the story? Is there a logical conclusion to what is going on here? If it is, we need to make sure that we voice things in such a way that we can keep that flow of thought right on to the end, to that logical conclusion. If there's not a logical conclusion, we need to still carry the storyline along so that we can see the audacity of what is not logical, or get to the point where the listener has engaged with us so much that he or she is able to make their own conclusion as to what the end of the story should be. Woodshedding is about getting to the essence of the message of the story. So as we are going through and we're looking at a script, we're doing this script analysis, we are trying to answer all these questions that we've talked about. The overall thing that we're trying to do is make sure that we're effectively communicating the message for the particular audience that we are sharing that message with, and doing it in light of the character that we are portraying. Woodshed your script to be more believable. Even a character that is simply an announcer or a spokesperson has a personality that is appropriate to the copy. Now, we can think of some kind of extreme sort of ones that have been out there that are kind of larger than life and have personalities in and of themselves. If you've not heard of the names of the people on the screen here, you may want to look them up. Billy Mays had a way larger than life sort of way of pitching products, and people sought him out because of his unique style. Vince Offer had a bit of a snarky sort of way of doing things, which gave him a little bit of notoriety. And then there's the Old Spice guy. You all should know who I'm talking about. The one that says, look at your man, then look at me, then back at your man, then back at me. And the way that he carried himself in promoting the Old Spice products. Now, these ones are a lot more kind of over the top in terms of personality and presence, but even the more subtle ones are going to have a certain personality to them that's going to create a certain type of appeal, or perhaps even a lack of appeal, depending on the presentation they're trying to make and the overall end game in terms of the way that the entire production piece is put together. Anyway, finding the personality of the character you are playing is going to allow you to lend authenticity to the role, which gives the character life and makes your presence believable. So we have to, in every script, no matter who it is, if it's a particular person, if it's a particular personality, or it's just someone that's there at the client's whim to read words off a page, we still have to give it a certain personality to make it appealing for a listener to listen to. Character analysis, going back to some of the core elements that we talked about in Chapter 8. This is core element number 3, C for character. If you are fortunate, there may be some direction written on a script to help you understand the writer's vision of the story. Now, and this is something that we need to keep in mind, is that when scripts are written for us, the person that wrote the script has this certain vision in his or her head as to how the production ought to go. And as much as is possible, we want to try to relive, recreate, realize that particular vision. Now, if there's directions as to how to deliver certain lines, that helps us tremendously. But there are times that we don't get that, and that we may not have access to the scriptwriter to ask questions and make determinations. So then it falls on us to determine the best approach to make that script come to life. Character analysis then becomes the process of defining the attitude and the personality of a character. As a voice actor, you need to know as much about the role you are playing as possible. The more you understand your character, the easier it will be for you to find those emotions, attitudes, and personality traits within you that you can adapt and use to create a believable character and bring life to the words in the script. Now, we're talking a lot about script analysis in this chapter. There's also a character analysis that you can do that we will talk about in more detail when we get to the chapter on character in and of itself. But just as much as we are trying to woodshed our scripts, woodshed our copy that we have, we also want to pay special attention to our character in particular and ask a good bit of questions about the character before we give it voice. Here's some things to look for. Who is the character talking to? What is the target audience of the character? Is it the listening audience at large? Is it the character interacting with other characters? Who is the character talking to? What is the character's age? How old is he? How old is she? How does the character stand? What's the physical position? Does he or she stand upright? Does he or she slouch? Sitting? Leaning? What's the overall physicality of the character? Where is the character from? That's another question to ask. Also, does the character speak with a dialect or an accent that might be related to where the character is from? How would the character dress? More formal, more casual? If it's someone that is portraying as like a repair person, perhaps the clothes are dirty, maybe they got some holes in them. Think about what the character is wearing or possibly could be wearing. What do you know or what can you guess about the character's economic status? Wealthy person, not wealthy, working a minimum wage job, doing something blue collar, white collar, stay at home. What is the character's economic status? Eighth, what is the overall mood or attitude of the copy and therefore the mood and attitude of the character? Some more questions. What is the pace of the copy? What is the tempo at which the copy should be read? Is it fast, quick pace? That might lead some information as to the way that the character conducts himself or herself. Is it slower? And what sort of mentality comes along with a slower sort of read? Perhaps something that's more thoughtful. Maybe something that's a little more unsure of himself or herself. From the context of the script, what do you know about the way your character moves? What sort of energy does the character have? Quick, athletic, slower, sluggish, maybe not as healthy? Some questions to ask there. Those are going to affect how you give a character voice. What is the product or the service that is being offered? Notice how far down the list this one is. Now, something we need to keep in mind is that especially when it comes to reading for commercials, the main goal of the read is to talk about that particular product or service. It is, in essence, the star of the show. However, we first have to answer questions about character in order for us to be able to determine how to give voice to the particular product or service, because we're doing it in light of the character. So while the product or service is the main thing and the main reason that we're giving voice to a script, it has to be done in a way that makes sense in light of the script as a whole. So the question does need to be answered, but first we need to look at the way a script is written and determine our characterization, then determine how that character would talk about the product or the service in question. All right, moving on. What is the character's purpose or role in the story? taking all these questions that we've asked previously and trying to put them all together into some sort of motive that the character has and putting that into action. What life events or actions brought the character to this moment in time? What's the theatrical backstory? What happened right before the beginning of the script? What's the pre-life? Also, what is your character responding to? Another question that deals with backstory. And finally, what does the character want from telling the story? What are the character's desires? This might involve a little bit of subtext here. What can we say about the character and what his or her overall intentions are in light of the copy that we have in front of us? So these are all great questions to ask when it comes to defining our character and looking at the character in light of the script that we have in front of us. Creating a visual image of your character and the environment in which the conversation is taking place will help to develop the necessary tension for the drama. Sometimes it's in the words the character says. Sometimes it's in the way the character is portrayed, the personality, the temperament. Sometimes it's in the subtext of what the character is saying, but then what the character is thinking and actually motivated for that's not necessarily let out in terms of the words that the character is saying. So all these sorts of things help us to be able to determine how it is that we should read, what tone, what attitude, what voice, what inflection, what tempo, what pacing, what dialect. All those things based on who we determine our character is and what the character's motives are. This is a good place for us to pause, and we will finish things up with part B, and from there go on and finish up the chapter on woodshedding.